Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about a moment of reckoning the moment when an empath, after years of absorbing, understanding, and excusing, decides to stand in their power. Because here's the truth, narcissists thrive on control, on manipulation, on the dance of dominance. But there's one thing they can't handle when an empath stops playing their game. See, if you're an empath, you spent most of your life feeling deeply. You've walked into rooms and sensed the tension before anyone spoke. You've soothed, supported, and sacrificed for people who never once stopped to ask, what about you? And if you've ever been in the orbit of a narcissist, you know what that feels like. It feels like a slow erosion of self, like giving and giving, hoping that one day they'll see you the way you've always seen them, with love, with patience, with care. But here's what narcissists can't handle. The day you stop seeking their approval, the day you wake up and realize that their version of love is conditional, but your worth is not. The power of no, there's something profoundly unsettling about the word no, not for us, but for the people who have relied on our inability to say it. For an empath, no has always felt like a betrayal. We've been conditioned to believe that love means sacrifice, that understanding means endurance, and that our value is tied to how much we can tolerate. But here's the thing, narcissists don't just dislike boundaries, they fear them. Boundaries are the one thing that strip them of their ability to manipulate, to gaslight, to drain you. Because when you say no, you're not just denying them something, you're declaring your right to exist outside of their control. It's not just a refusal, it's a revolution. And revolutions, no matter how small, always cause discomfort for those who have thrived on unchecked power. That's why the first time you say no to their demands, to their need for endless validation, to their ability to dictate your emotions, you'll feel a shift. It might start as guilt, as a tightness in your chest, as a whisper in your head saying, maybe I'm being too harsh. But what's really happening is that for the first time, you're choosing yourself. And here's where things get messy. Narcissists don't just accept a boundary and move on. No, they test it. They push, prod, manipulate. They turn no into a challenge, a personal affront. They'll accuse you of being selfish, of changing, of not being the same loving, understanding person you once were. And that's because they need you to feel bad about saying no. They need you to second guess yourself, because if you don't, the entire foundation of their control begins to crumble. See, narcissists don't rely on brute force. They don't need to chain you to them physically. Instead, they weave invisible threads of guilt, obligation, and self-doubting till you're trapped in a prison of your own making. But the second you recognize that your no is not cruelty but self-respect, everything shifts. You start seeing how much they depended on your compliance, how their love was never about partnership but power. And in that realization, you begin to understand that their biggest fear isn't losing you, it's losing their ability to control you. The power of no isn't just about drawing a line in the sand, it's about recognizing that your worth isn't tied to how much you endure. Think about how many times you've said yes when you meant no. How many times you've silenced your own needs to keep the peace. How many times you've allowed someone to take up space in your life because you were too afraid of what would happen if you shut the door. That's what narcissists count on, that fear, that hesitation, that internal struggle that keeps you bound to them. But here's what happens when you finally stand firm. They scramble, they test. They might try to guilt trip you with nostalgia, reminding you of the good times. They might explode in rage, trying to scare you back into submission. Or they might play the victim, hoping your empathy will override your boundary. And if none of that works, they do what narcissists do best, they discard. They walk away, not because they don't care, but because they can't handle being powerless. But let's talk about what happens inside you when you claim the power of no. At first, it might feel foreign, even wrong, because for so long, you've been conditioned to make others comfortable at your own expense. But the more you practice it, the more you realize that saying no is an act of self-love. It's the way you tell yourself, I matter. It's the way you reclaim your time, your energy, your emotional space. And something beautiful happens when you step into this power. You stop fearing rejection. You stop seeking validation from those who never had your best interest at heart. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And that is the one thing a narcissist cannot handle an empath who no longer needs their approval to feel whole. The silence that speaks volumes. Silence is a language all its own, and for an empath, it's often the hardest one to speak. We are wired for connection, for understanding, for filling the empty spaces with words that soothe and heal. But there comes a point when words no longer serve us, when explanations fall on deaf ears, when defending ourselves only fuels the fire of manipulation. Narcissists thrive on engagement. They need you to react, to explain, to fight for their approval, because every ounce of energy you give them is proof that they still control the narrative. That's why silence is so powerful. It is the one thing they can't twist, can't manipulate, can't use against you. When an empath stops justifying, stops explaining, stops feeding the endless cycle of emotional warfare, the narcissist is left with nothing to grab onto. And that void, the absence of your energy, your defense, your emotions, is something they cannot handle. Because silence in the right hands is not passive. It's a declaration. It's the moment you stop playing their game, the moment you refuse to be baited, the moment you step back and say, I'm done. And nothing unnerves a narcissist more than an empath who is finally done. But here's the tricky part. Silence is not easy. It's not just about keeping your mouth shut. It's about unlearning the instinct to explain yourself, to seek closure, to prove your worth. When you've spent your life being emotionally available, being the person who fixes, who soothes, who understands, silence feels unnatural, almost cruel. Narcissists count on that. They know that the moment they withdraw, the moment they create distance, you'll rush to close the gap. And that's why your silence is a form of power. It's the moment you refuse to chase, refuse to beg, refuse to play into the narrative that you must prove yourself to be worthy of respect. The first time you respond to manipulation with silence, you might feel a storm inside of you: doubt, guilt, fear. But what you'll start to notice is that without your reactions, the narcissist starts to unravel. They poke, they provoke, they create chaos just to get you to break your silence. Because your disengagement forces them to face something they've spent their entire lives avoiding themselves. And that's where silence becomes a mirror. When an empath finally stops engaging, the narcissist is left alone with their own reflection. They can no longer deflect their insecurities onto you, can no longer project their wounds onto your open heart, can no longer use your emotional energy as fuel for their fragile ego, and that is terrifying for them. They need to pull you back into the fight because without your reactions, they are forced to confront the emptiness inside them. This is why silence is such an effective boundary. It creates space for truth to surface. It forces the narcissist to sit with the discomfort they've spent a lifetime running from. And more importantly, it forces you to sit with a different kind of discomfort, the discomfort of not being responsible for someone else's emotional chaos. It's in this space that clarity begins to emerge, that you start to see the patterns for what they are, that you realize the only thing holding you in the cycle was the belief that you had to respond. That belief was a lie. And once you see that, everything changes. Because silence is not just an absence of word sit, is the presence of self-worth. It is a shift in power, a reclaiming of your own emotional space, a refusal to participate in the dysfunction that has kept you small. It doesn't mean you stop feeling or that you stop caring. It means you stop performing for someone who only sees you as a character in their script. It means you stop feeding the narrative that their approval dictates your value. And the most powerful part, silence does not seek revenge. It does not scream or beg or demand acknowledgement. It simply exists, unwavering, undeniable, and that is why it shakes a narcissist to their core. Because they don't just fear your silence, they fear what it means. It means they have lost access to your mind, your emotions, your heart. It means you have stepped out of the illusion they created and into the truth of who you are. And once you do that, there is no going back. Self-love as a revolution. Self-love is not just a quiet act of self-care. It is a full-blown revolution. It is the moment you decide that you are no longer waiting for permission to take up space, to be seen, to be valued. And for an empath, self-love is especially radical because we have spent years, if not a lifetime, pouring ourselves into other people, trying to heal wounds we didn't create, trying to be enough for those who would never be satisfied. Narcissists in particular thrive on our self-doubt. They count on us believing that love must be earned, that worth must be proved, that boundaries are selfish. And so when an empath finally turns inward and says, I choose me, it sends shockwaves through the dynamic. Because self-love is the one thing a narcissist cannot control. They can manipulate your guilt, your fear, your longing for connection, but they cannot manipulate a person who has learned to validate themselves. And that is why self-love is not just personal growth, it is an act of defiance. It is standing in the mirror and refusing to see yourself through the eyes of those who have diminished you. It is rewriting the story they tried to write for you. But self-love is not a straight road. It is messy, uncomfortable, and often painful. When you have spent years defining yourself through the eyes of others, choosing yourself feels foreign, almost wrong. Narcissists weaponize this. They call you selfish. They say you've changed. They guilt trip you with memories of how selfless you used to be, how you used to drop everything to accommodate them, how you used to be the one who never asked for too much. And this is where the revolution begins, because self-love is not about becoming hard or unfeeling it. It's about recognizing that your needs, your desires, your boundaries are just as valid as anyone else's. It is about unlearning the idea that being kind means being available at all costs. It is about stepping into your own life without apology. And here's what happens when you do. The narcissist scrambles. They don't know how to handle a version of you that doesn't bend to their will, that doesn't shrink in their presence. Because when an empath chooses themselves, the entire power dynamic shifts. Self-love is a revolution because it demands that you stop playing small. It asks you to stand in the fullness of who you are, even when it makes others uncomfortable. And make no mistake when you stop over-explaining, stop over-giving, stop making yourself small for the comfort of others. People will resist. They will question you, challenge you, try to pull you back into old patterns. And this is where the real work begins. Because self-love is not just about affirmations and bubble baths. It is about holding your ground when the world tells you that you are too much, too independent, too selfish. It is about looking at the people who once dictated your worth and realizing they no longer have that power. It is about reclaiming your time, your energy, your emotional space. And when you do this, something shifts inside you. You stop seeking love that comes with conditions. You stop craving validation from those who only valued you when you were convenient. You stop proving and start being. And that is a kind of freedom most people never get to experience. But here's the most powerful part. Self-love doesn't just change you, it changes everything around you. When you love yourself fiercely, unapologetically, you become a mirror that forces others to see where they have dimmed their own light. Some will rise with you, others will resent you, and that's okay. Because self-love is not about pleasing others, it is about honoring yourself. It is about refusing to live a life that is dictated by fear, by guilt, by the need for external validation. And when an empath reaches this place, this space of wholeness, of clarity, of knowing who they are without needing anyone else's approval, it is not just a personal transformation, it is a revolution. Because a fully empowered empath is something a narcissist can never control. A fully empowered empath doesn't seek love that requires their silence, their sacrifice, their self-abandonment. A fully empowered empath stands tall, speaks boldly, loves deeply, but never at the cost of themselves. And that is the moment everything changes. Walking away without a fight. Walking away without a fight is one of the hardest things an empath will ever do. We are wired for connection, for healing, for trying just one more time to make things right. We stay in conversations that drain us, relationships that diminish us, and arguments that go nowhere because we believe if we just explain ourselves a little better, if we just show a little more love, if we just give a little more grace, then maybe, just maybe, they will finally see us. But here's the truth. Some people are not interested in understanding you. They are only interested in controlling you. And narcissists in particular thrive on emotional engagement. They don't need love, they need power, they don't need your perspective, they need your reaction. So when you finally stop explaining, stop defending, stop giving them access to your emotions, they panic, they push harder, provoke more, try to pull you back into the fight, because walking away without a fight is the one thing they cannot handle. It is the moment you take back your power knot by yelling, not by proving a point, but by simply refusing to participate in a battle that was never meant to be won. But let's be honest, walking away is not easy. It requires an almost unbearable level of self-restraint. Everything in you will want to correct the lies, to defend your name, to seek closure. But closure is not something a narcissist will ever give you, because closure would mean admitting they were wrong. Instead, they will rewrite the story, twist the narrative, paint themselves as the victim. And the moment you try to fight back, you've already lost. Because the truth is, they don't need to win the argument, they just need to keep you in the argument. That's why walking away is so powerful. It is not silence out of weakness. It is silence out of strength. It is saying, I no longer need you to validate my truth. It is realizing that your peace is more valuable than being right. And that's the hardest part for an empath, choosing peace over justice, because we want fairness, we want honesty, we want people to own their behavior, but a narcissist will never give you that. And once you accept that, once you truly see it, you stop wasting your breath trying to convince them of something they are committed to never understanding. And here's where the real shift happens. Walking away without a fight is not just about them. It's about you. It's about unlearning the belief that love means proving yourself. It's about breaking the cycle of over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-giving. Narcissists condition empaths to think that if they just do enough, they will finally be loved the way they deserve. But the moment you walk away without a fight, you shatter that illusion. You realize that love is not something you have to earn by enduring disrespect. You realize that you are not obligated to stay in spaces where you are only valued when you are bending to someone else's will. And yes, it will feel unnatural at first. You will feel the pull to go back, to explain, to seek closure one last time. But every time you choose silence over engagement, every time you choose peace over chaos, every time you walk away without looking back, you are reclaiming a piece of yourself that was never meant to be lost. Because walking away without a fight is not about giving up, it is about choosing yourself. It is about recognizing that real strength is not found in how loud you can be, but in how little you allow someone else to control your energy. A narcissist wants you broken, exhausted, entangled in their web. They want you defending yourself against accusations that were never true to begin with. But when you refuse to engage, when you stop explaining and simply leave, they are left standing alone with the chaos they created. And that is something they cannot handle, because narcissists need you to play the role they have written for you. And when you step out of that role, when you choose to exit the stage instead of continuing the performance, you are no longer a character in their story. You become the author of your own. And that is where the real power begins. Thriving without them. Perhaps the hardest thing for a narcissist to witness is your happiness without them. Because the truth is, they never wanted you to be strong. They wanted you to need them. So when you move forward, when you heal, when you laugh louder and love deeper without them, that's the ultimate victory. So to my fellow empaths, you are not weak. You are not too sensitive. You are not here to fix broken people at the cost of breaking yourself. And when you finally strike back, not with anger, not with revenge, but with unshakable self-worth, trust me, the narcissist won't know what to do, because they can't handle losing control. And they especially can't handle losing control over you. Now go reclaim your power